Good afternoon, everybody. And a very warm welcome to the last formal session of today. Great to see you all here. In a rather warm, you might have noticed, I don't know if you have, Glasgow. I thought that heat rose, so I'm surprised at the people who are sitting higher up at the back. But anyway, I just wanted to make it clear that James and I agreed in a pact that we would take our jackets off. So please don't take it personally. However, you will be glad to know that's as far as we'll be going. There'll be no full Monty here on the stage, I can tell you that. My name's Alastair Delaney. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of QAA, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you all and with a very sterling panel. I think this event overall has allowed us the opportunity to look back at 20 years of enhancement-led approach in higher education, and that's really important. But we also need to look forward, and there's a lot going on, as I'm sure you know. The Scottish Funding Council's review into coherent provision and sustainability, and it's this exploration of a single quality framework across higher and further education. And I must say that QA is absolutely delighted to be commissioned by the Funding Council to take forward the future of enhancement work across both those sectors and quality assurance work and review across those sectors. We're really looking forward to working with everyone in that, and I think it's a great opportunity for us. You know our style, hopefully, most of you who work with us, we want to work collaboratively even, with you, and to co-create the future together. And that's what we want to do over the period of the coming year. So it's great that we've been able to do that. It's also a perfect time, though, to take stock and look ahead. And so in this session, we have an opportunity to reflect. What does it mean, for example, to transition from two distinctive but collaborative HE and FE sectors to a shared, coherent tertiary approach? What does that look like? We have an opportunity to acknowledge how far we've come, and that's important. We are looking back 20 years, but also an opportunity to look forward. How do we retain the best of the past, but also improve the system for students and institutions going forward? And that's a real challenge for us all now. Not just to take the past, but to think about what it looks like in the future. So I hope we're going to have some friendly discussion and debate that you will contribute to. And I'm looking forward to that, because you will get the opportunity to ask very challenging and far-reaching questions of my panel here. But I have got an expert panel. And it's really good to have an expert panel, because it means I don't have to try to answer the questions. My expert panel members will answer the questions. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So James, do you want to go first?
Good afternoon, colleagues. It's an absolute delight to be here with you. My name is James Dunphy. I'm Director of Enhancement. I'm Director of Access, Learning and Outcomes at the Scottish Funding Council. But previous to that was Director of Enhancement of Learning, Teaching and Access at Robert Gordon University. I'm delighted to say I've been to a couple of these conferences before, and it's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Thanks, James. Ellie?
Hi everyone, my name is Ellie Gomersall. I have the absolute joy of being the President of the National Union of Students here in Scotland. This is my first conference here. I was previously President at University of the West of Scotland Students Association. Before that I was a student rep, and throughout that took part in variety of things like ILRs and actually ELIA as well. But equally, I think when I was at the Student Association, I was very much more involved in the sort of, the campaigns and the protests and all of those fun sides of student politics. And so it's been a really interesting and steep learning curve, but a really, really fascinating one over the past year in this role, to learn so much more about enhancement and quality in the sector. I'm also, I think I can, looking around at some of my other colleagues, I'm glad to see that I'm not the only person here who was maybe a toddler back 20 years ago when we were looking at the start of this in the 20 years of enhancements. But I'm really excited to be looking at the future of it, and in particular also in my role as co-chair of the Tertiary Quality Framework Steering Group at the SFC, where I work with alongside James. So really excited to be here and to have this discussion.
Thanks, Ellie. I'm sure you were referring to the panel there when you were saying that. So, Susan, over to you.
Hi there, my name's Susan Stewart. I'm Director of the Open University in Scotland. We have over 21,000 students, which makes us Scotland's fourth largest university. And we were delving into the stats the other day, and we realised that we actually educate more Scottish students than any other university in the country. because the stats, of course, mask international students. I've been at the OU since December 15. Before that, I was at University of Glasgow as Director of Corporate Comms. And before that, I had my career's not exactly been linear. Started off in political journalism, then went into political comms, Scottish government, local government, set up the Scottish Affairs Office in the United States, British Embassy in Washington, DC. So I've been really privileged to do a lot of quite exciting jobs at quite interesting times in history. And I can say that the job I do for Open University is by far, without a doubt, the most satisfying job I have ever had. Open University is the Carlsberg of the HE sector. We reach the people in places that others cannot, and do a very valuable job. Within the context of today, I'd also say that we have articulation agreements with every single college in Scotland outside of the UHI framework, so we're excited and enthusiastic about the new approach, and I hope we'll have some rich discussions. I feel somewhat outside my comfort zone because Shona Littlejohn, one of my deputies, she leads on all the QAA work for us. But if I get stuck, I'll just pass it over to James, because you can always rely on the SFC to do your turn.
It's all about partnership.
Absolutely, James.
I hope we've caught that on camera. Anyway, Kyrsten, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Kyrsten Black. I'm the Registrar at SRUC. I've been there for 30 years, and I remember well the launch date of the launch event of the first enhancement theme 20 years ago, so I sadly wasn't a toddler or even in my 20s. So working at SIUC, Scotland's Rural College, we're a truly tertiary organisation. We are sort of legally an HEI, but we deliver further education as well, and we deliver quite a lot of further education. And I sort of was thinking back to when I started my career as I was a research scientist teaching soil science to both HND agriculture students and to master's level students. So we maybe didn't call it tertiary at SIUC then, but that's exactly what it was. We were a tertiary organisation and have been, for as long as I've been there and before. So I'm looking forward to trying to answer any questions that you've got for us.
Great, since you've got that history of the law becoming your way, Kyrsten, so that's excellent. And I've got privilege of chairing the panel today. I've been at QAA for 3.5 years. I was Director of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland before being the Deputy Chief Executive. And prior to that, and don't hold this against me, I was also an HMI in Education Scotland, and prior to that HMIE. So I've noticed on the college side, I was responsible in that side as well. So I get a good picture of how things are across both. Before we start, I apologise if I get distracted. I think all these people up the back were waving at me or something, because they're trying to keep themselves cool. But Susan's got it right. She brought a fan with her, yeah.
Absolutely.
Open University did little menopause awareness kits. And I don't know if my colleagues were trying to tell me something about my mood, but I had three left on my desk. So.
You don't have a spare one.
God, I wish I'd attended that at the moment. Anyway, right. Before explaining the format of what we're actually, before we're going to do, that was close. Shouldn't put that glass there, should I? You're going to tell me that. Don't put that glass there. Before explaining the format of what we're going to do, many of you will have heard the Minister for HEFE and Veterans earlier on today, giving us an input, Mr. Graham Day. And because SFC are obviously the lead agency in taking forward a lot of what the Minister was saying, I've asked James if he could give us just some reflections on what the Minister said before we get started into the panel proper. James.
Sure. Well, thanks, Alastair, for that opportunity. I think a couple of observations just to frame what Mr. Day said. I think the fact the Minister came here and gave us an address talking about the commitment of Scottish Government to quality enhancement, student partnership, a framework for our tertiary system developed in partnership should be really good news for us. So if you've chalked it up as mediocre, I would absolutely reframe it as really good news. It's great to have government be intensely interested in the quality of the student experience and being committed to enhancing the student experience. For us in this room or online, that can only mean good things as we look ahead into the future, as Alastair says. I think the second thing I would say is we have a massive opportunity through the tertiary quality enhancement framework development to take the very best of Scotland's approach to quality enhancement that exists for our HEIs and think about how we accelerate that progress across both our colleges and universities. And panel members have already hinted at the fact that colleges and universities are in conversation and connection with each other all of the time. But actually, some of the things that we have in our system help that. Our Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework, for example, I would say it, of course, our Tertiary Scottish Funding Council, but some other elements don't necessarily help us to join as effectively in partnership as we might. And that development of a tertiary quality enhancement framework really is a major opportunity, and I think we should see it as that. Third thing I would say is we should see ourselves as enhancement actors. I was really struck by the remarks that the Minister made around the quality of provision and the need to be committed to continue to improve opportunities for learners of all ages and stages. And the work which is happening in other parts of the Scottish education system to look at school reform, for example, will have implications for us. If we work together to support the Scottish Government in its agenda, if we work in partnership, then we can achieve great things. And I think that's a really great message to take from the address as we think about not just this panel session, but all the work that will come into the future on the tertiary framework.
Thanks, James. And thanks for that framing of where we are at the moment, which is really important and a really exciting time, and I hope you feel that as well. You may have questions, you may have uncertainties, but it's an exciting time. So what's the format of this going to be? Well, we've got a panel discussion, and I'm going to structure that for ourselves around a few questions to get us started. And then afterwards, delegates can ask their own questions, right? So you have your opportunity to ask the questions. We'll have roving mics and all the rest of it, but I'll tell you about that later. Including online, because you'll be able to use the chat function to post questions at that point. If you're online or if you're in here, you can use Mentimeter to record your thoughts as well on what's being said, and we can feed that back and forward. And there will be a code on screen, there we are, code on screen, which allows you to use that to record what you're thinking. It's also good for after the event as well, obviously, for us to take views and thoughts when we're thinking about the reflections of the event. So let's move on without further ado. And the first thing that I want to do is to look backwards, because I think we need to ask ourselves the question, how has Scotland's enhancement-led approach to quality matured over the years? Because I'm sure it's not been the same since the start. And since Kyrsten said that she was around at the beginning of time, then I think Kyrsten should go first.
Right, thanks for that. Well, I suppose for me, one of the big changes is, and I think we'll probably come back to this later in the day, is around the role of students and partners. I think when I started in higher education, it wasn't truly a partnership. And I think for me that is what it challenges us as organisations to do the very best that we can. It also, you know, I'm thinking of an example from my own organisation when we were developing the Help Not Hinder regulations for COVID, and we worked, you know, hand in hand with the Students' Association, and actually it made a difficult situation a little bit more fun, and it also meant that we got the best possible outcome for it. So I would say, first of all, students as partners. I think the second thing for me, and you know, it's one of the areas that I strive for at work and try to instill in work is around sort of the team approach, the collegiate approach, and I think for me that's what the enhancement themes has really done, is it's given an absolutely truly collegiate approach so that we can work together and that we can, you know, we can be open and honest about where we've got a shortcoming or an area that we need to improve, and we can discuss it. And I suppose the third thing, and this is, I'll stop after this one, but this was really, really important for us as an organisation, as a tertiary organisation, delivering from SCQF4 right through to level 11. And it's a very specific example, but for us it was about the expansion of the institution-led reviews. So what SIUC was formed from a merger in 2012, but into a host institution, SAC, had been in existence for 40, 50 years. When we merged, we sort of thought, well, institution-led review, a review starting at SCQF level 7, you're missing half the journey. That's not truly reflective of the student journey from when they may start with us to when they end with us. So what we did was that we decided in our wisdom to expand the range of the institution-led review so that our further education was examined as part, and we didn't do like an FE ILR or an HE ILR. We did subject ILR and looked at the entire SCQF levels, and for that's been relatively recent, probably about 6-7 years ago maybe, but that's been sort of huge for us.
Thanks, Kyrsten. And I want to pick up on the student part in a second, but I mean, have anybody got any other reflections? I think, James, you were around. I'm sure you weren't around right at the very beginning, James. Of course not. Oh, you were, okay. Go on.
Actually, I think the student partnership thing to me is really straightforward. You can look across the sector and see student officers who had a really important role because of the quality enhancement framework, who are now in senior management roles in our institutions, in our national agencies, who are making decisions based on the experiences that they had early in their career in this space. But actually, the point I was going to make, so I think it's great there's a number of us who've been kicking about long enough to come back each year, but actually the really exciting people to meet at these conferences are the people who are here for the first time, because what a great team you are meeting when you come to an enhancement themes conference. And if this is your first conference, I absolutely know it will not be your last, and that is because of the quality of the enhancement practitioners and practice here in Scotland, and that is a direct result of the tertiary, of the quality enhancement framework.
Thanks, James. I want to pick up with Ellie on the student part, because it's at the core of what we've tried to do over these number of years. How do you feel it, for you, Ellie, for the student role?
I think one of the really important things is that move to actual partnership, and not just calling it partnership, but it's genuine partnership. And it's genuine, your students being part of the decision-making around our own education and our own student journey. And I think that is really important. There's I think a big difference between, for instance, student representation and student partnership, because I think sometimes when we talk about representation, sometimes that can end up being, we will ask the students what they think, and the students will tell us what they think, and then we'll bear that in mind whereas actual partnership is about students being a core part of the decision-making process itself, and I think that's really essential. And I think that's been especially essential, as you picked up on, around COVID. Of course, I have not been around for 20 years. I've been around for about 5 years, but what a 5 years to have been around in, because during the pandemic and when there were these really, really crucial, huge decisions that had to be made just like that, having students in the room makes all the world of difference. And for me as a student, being in the room made all the world of difference. And I think that is really important. And then now, as we are starting to pay more attention, I think as a result of the cost of living crisis, for instance, and the far more sort of acute effects that's having on students at the moment, that's drawing more attention to the different experiences that students have. And something that I often say is there's lots of different types of students in Scotland. And actually, if I was to put a number on it, I would say there's probably just over 500,000 different types of students in Scotland, because every single student is different, and every student will have a different experience, they'll have different needs. And actually now as we're starting and making sure that student partnership is about making sure that every single one of those students' needs are being met, and that every single one of those students, if they are able to, if they're wanting to, and actually also making sure that they are able to if they want to, being part of those decision-making processes is really essential. And then as we come on to things like, when we're talking about this move towards tertiary, I think that becomes even more important in the context of things like lifelong learning, and the fact that we're starting now to acknowledge that when you're looking at those students and that student demographic across Scotland, that I think the stereotypical idea that actually maybe not necessarily the people in this room today, but a lot of the wider public might think of when they think of who a student is just not accurate at all. And so again, it's about making sure that students are at the heart of those decision-making processes, and that not just students themselves, but actually also potential students, folk who maybe aren't currently able to access education because of the barriers that exist there. I mean, when we're thinking of things like, you know, the just transition, for instance, and the really, really crucial need for lifelong learning and for people to be able to go in and retrain and reskill to meet the needs of, you know, the climate emergency. When you've got huge barriers like, for instance, the financial cost and the financial barriers of going into education, if you have a family, maybe you're a single mum, you know, the huge things that will prevent you from being able to access education in the first place. It's really crucial that we're thinking about those sort of students and these decisions as well. And so many of the students who have made it through, students like myself, for instance, will have been in that position where we've considered, actually, is this what's right for me? And then again, it's about making sure that those voices are able to not just be heard, but embedded throughout the student experience and throughout universities and colleges across Scotland.
Thanks, Ellie. And I think it's been a key feature of this approach from the very start. And Susan, as a leader of an institution, if you like, in Scotland, what does it mean to you as an institution to have students so integrally involved in what you do?
I would echo what everyone says. I mean, obviously, it's a little bit more challenging for us sometimes to have the regular communication with our students. We are not a campus university. 75% of our students work, lots of caring responsibilities, etc., etc. I'm not sure whether it was today or tomorrow where a couple of my colleagues from OU in Scotland are going to be doing a session on student engagement, but students as partners rather than just being consulted on essentially institutional priorities is absolutely critical to delivering the best possible experience for students and ensuring their success. For us at the OU, that might not necessarily be completing a degree with us. It might be completing a module. It might be starting with us, building confidence, then taking these credits to a more traditional university. Huge number of our students come to us with HN qualifications. I think the other thing is that there's many unique things about the Open University, but we are a Four Nations university, so we have activities in England, Northern Ireland, Ireland too, Wales and Scotland. And I have to say, my colleagues working south of the border within the OFS regime, look enviously at the enhancement approach that we have in Scotland. I mean, it is now very much embedded and valued by the sector and also has an international reputation. So it's critical. I think the other thing I'd say is Ellie's point about every student being different is absolutely critical, and students are the experts in being students. So in my institution, 25% of our students have disabilities. So the OU in its entirety across the UK actually has more students with disabilities than the rest of the sector combined. Quite a phenomenal statistic. And it's through working with our students that we've become a bit of the UK, if not indeed international experts in providing education for students with different needs. And we couldn't have done that as a university without the students been right there at the beginning. So
thank you.
Essential.
I think it's interesting. I mean, this all might sound like motherhood and apple pie, and I think that I think we need to address that, because there may be some people who have not been involved in the enhancement work or the enhancement-led approach over the past 20 years in the audience here. I have heard tell, and I'm going to look at Kyrsten first, although James may also have another thing, that it didn't all go from 0 to 100 at the very beginning, and I think part of this is how did it evolve, and what kind of attitude was there at the very beginning when this started, and how that's matured and developed over time.
I think that's really interesting. I think, we got involved, and it was a really good. I think we're probably slightly wary at first, sort of dipping our toe in the water, and then I particularly remember the assessment enhancement theme. I don't know what it was about the assessment enhancement theme. I think it just maybe really was needed at the time. And I think it was just a brilliant enhancement theme that got everybody involved. And I remember that we were having sort of quite large colleague meetings to discuss assessment and so off the back of it, and we invited guest speakers and so on. And I think it just evolved and evolved, and I think it's something that I think often I was in a role like this that I was sort of mainly a research scientist but doing some teaching, but actually I probably shouldn't say this, I quite liked research, but I loved education, and actually being able to do a bit of a deeper dive around the enhancement themes and sort of, getting to talk about how weird does it sound, getting to talk about assessment for a whole afternoon. It was a joyous thing, and so. Yeah, I know how weird that sounds, but for me at that time in my career, it was a really exciting thing to do, and I think the success or the early success has just bred success and got more people involved. That's how I remember it, or how I'm able to remember it.
Helpful. You need to get out more, but it's really helpful. Thank you, James.
I think that feels right to me as well. So it's important for us to say it wasn't just the enhancement themes that were new, it was the 5 pillars of the quality enhancement framework, not to get terribly geeky, including, of course, one of which is on public information. So even in this audience, that's not going to sell out quickly. But I would say over a period of time, probably what has happened is our understanding of the value of enhancement to our students, to our institutions, and to us as a colleague base has developed really significantly. And that has helped us to become much more interested in how we deepen and broaden the impact of enhancement and the way we think about quality. So those points around, we won't get everything right all of the time, but we should be committed to understanding the evidence base. We should be committed to working together in teams and to taking demonstrable steps to enhance the quality of the student experience.
Thanks, Susan.
Can I just come in on that? I think the emphasis upon evidence and data, both qualitative and quantitative, can't say that word, is absolutely essential. And openness and honesty has been the hallmark of our approach in Scotland. Enhancement won't always deliver the expected results, and I'm a former comms director in a university, so I understand the importance of good PR. This is not about good PR. It's about knowing what works, looking at the data, and using that to continue with a culture of continuous improvement and reflect honestly on what hasn't worked as you might have intended or hoped, and then reposition as appropriately.
That's really helpful, because it's also what's done with that, because everybody's in this together. The funder, the quality agency, and the institutions together, all agreeing that that's a positive thing, to own up to things which are still a challenge, and to try to work together to solve them, rather than it being a punitive reaction to putting forward those kinds of things. Kyrsten?
Yeah, I was going to give us a small anecdote about an experience that we had some time ago. But we'd written an enhancement, a list of areas for enhancement, and it was quite a long list. There was probably about 10 activities. We just sort of thought, yeah, we need to work on this. And a colleague from, I'm going to say externally, I'm not going to name names, but a colleague externally said, do you really want to include all 10 of those? And I said, well, yes, because that's what we're going to be working on, and we need to get everybody behind it to work on it. I said, but somebody might just count them. And I thought, that you do not understand that enhancement, in the enhancement world, it's okay to say we need to work on these, and we're going to work on them together to improve. And I'm glad on a daily basis that we don't work in that environment anymore.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to today, if you like. And I think I'd like to ask the panel, what do you think are the most important lessons that we've learned? And so therefore, what do we need to keep, and what do we need to consider changing about where we've got to now, looking to the future? What do you think? Who would like to go? Susan, yeah.
As I said before, we're internationally recognised, evidence-based, and we need to retain both of that, openness and honesty. I think we have started to have a greater focus on EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion. I think that is probably the most pressing challenge facing the sector. The attainment gap between white students and black minority ethnic students is still too large. There are too many of our students who are not being given the opportunities they deserve. And, you know, if I may say so, sometimes we have been pushed by student reps to take that more seriously and put it further up the agenda. I think some of the work that's been done on the anti-racist curriculum under QAA is absolutely essential, but I think we've still got a way to go. And I think in the new tertiary framework, that will remain very, very important.
Sorry, James.
So a couple of things. I think two things that feel really important in terms of our current approach, which I think we must keep forever and a day. One is common endeavour. So I think there is a benefit in us having a common endeavour to improve the quality of the student experience, period. I think for Scotland to have that as a national level commitment, which runs then through our institutions, implemented in different ways because of their context, because of their specialisms, because of their student need, feels really important. And the second thing I would say is that real commitment to creating opportunities. So that commitment to creating opportunity for a better learning experience and a better support experience for students, but also the commitment to create opportunity for practitioners in our system. So people who see it as a career path, to be interested in quality, to be interested in improving the student experience. The final thing I think we should be dialing into the future is we need to know our work is not done. The needs of students today are different from the students' needs in 2003. Of course, there are some things which are eternal, but also there are things which we need to take account of. The context our institutions are working in, the settlement, the public finance settlement through to 26, 27 will be flat cash. So that is an absolute reality that we will need to work with. So enhancement will be part of that journey, and we need to keep that focus up as we move ahead.
Thanks, James. Ellie, I mean, from the point of view of students, you've joined a bit later to all of this. What have you seen that you think to yourself, whatever you do, don't lose that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, I'd really strongly agree with the points made around sort of EDI and the real progress with that. And I think the fact that, I think it's important that we acknowledge that that's progress, and progress, we've still got a long, long way to go. But by starting on that journey, by starting to move forwards, that has a huge impact. And I think also, we've now really, just in the short time that I've been involved, I think there's a much greater acknowledgement of how every element of the student experience and every element of you know, your journey as a student, they all interact with each other. They can't ever be treated as separate. They can't ever be treated in silos, because when we're looking at things like EDI, for instance, or accessibility, or things like that, or you know, I think one of the really good examples actually is the work around, you know, sort of anti-racism and the anti-racist curriculum is about how that is embedded through every single element of your student journey. And I think that's really important. And then also acknowledging the different elements of you know, where some students might be disadvantaged. How is that embedded throughout every element of the student experience? You know, things like when we're talking about the cost of living crisis, for instance, it's about acknowledging that isn't just something for, you know, the student experience team or the student finance team or, you know, the student association to deal with. That's something that everyone in all of our institutions needs to be hyper aware of and needs to be taking action to make sure that students are still able to make the most of opportunities, and you know, thinking about how the curriculum is designed, acknowledging that there might be students who might be missing classes because they have to take on part-time work in order to pay the rent and keep the roof over their head. You know, that is something that everyone, you know, including you know, the academic staff, need to be conscious of, and you know, that needs to be throughout everything that we're doing. So I think it's that element of acknowledging that actually every element of the student experience interacts with each other. I think also just the other thing that I would touch on is the acknowledgement of, you know, I think we've talked a lot in recent years around skills and around the skill, you know, that sort of focus towards the skills that you learn as a student. And I think we're now starting to acknowledge so many of the skills that students would get out with the classroom, and actually looking at every element of the student experience and the skills that we're picking up along the way there, and how even actually for a lot of students, engaging with the Students' Association, including just things like the social skills that you get from making use of the facilities that you might have at a Students' Association, or going to events that are being put on, or things like that. Those are really core skills. Those are really core parts of the student experience, and it's not just a jolly that's on the side of going to classes and attending lectures and things like that. Actually, it's a core part of it. And I think it's, again, something that we have to keep really, really strongly at the front of our minds, especially when we're talking about the cost of living crisis, because it's about making sure that those elements of the student experience aren't just seen as expendable. They're not seen as the easy things that you can cut off and do away with, but actually they are core parts of the student experience and need to be protected in the same way as any other element does.
Thank you. Kyrsten, from your experience, what would you be looking at and saying, okay, these are the lessons learned, this is what we need to keep?
I think for me, two main things that we've mentioned briefly. One is using our networks. We're in a really fortunate position within SIUC because we're a tertiary provider. We've got a whole load of FE networks and a whole load of ITCHE networks, and I'm not ashamed to say that we use them. And I think that's really, really important. So, if we've got something that we're grappling with, we're pretty sure that someone else has grappled with it before. So we're very happy and are not ashamed to use our connections where we can. So I think that collegiate approach is really important. And the second sort of item that I think is really important, it has been touched on. James, you were saying the student journey is not the same as it was in 2003. The student journey is not the same as it was pre-COVID and pre-Brexit. And I think for me, that respect for that student journey, wherever it starts and wherever it ends, and I think that's just so important. And I think respect for what is a positive outcome from that student journey is really important as well. And that positive, that outcome, can be variable, but it's really important. I have to say, so to a certain extent, I'm a bit of a traditionalist at heart. So nothing makes me happier than to see, we've had students, within SIUC that have started off doing, a national certificate in agriculture and have come out with a PhD at the other end, and that makes me inordinately proud of my organisation, but actually it makes me inordinately proud of sort of post-school education in Scotland, and even prouder of the student themselves for that student journey that they've been on.
Thank you. So let's look a little bit to the future then, a tertiary future, a different future. What are your hopes? Ellie, what's your hopes for the future in tertiary quality and the role of students, I suppose, and the future for students?
I suppose it's an interesting thing when we're talking about tertiary, and I know that the students in the room won't be the only people who feel this, because actually, for us as students, and for instance, for us as a student movement, for us as NUS, we've always been tertiary. We've always been FE and HE. We've always been colleges and universities. And so it's an interesting thing, I think, sometimes for us to think about what it means for sort of a tertiary future, because for us it always has been. And for us, if you are a student whose student journey involves, for instance, FE and then HE, or that even in terms of when we're talking about lifelong learning, it might be some elements of FE, some elements of HE, some elements of FE scattered throughout. And for that student, because that's their life, that's their experience, that's one experience, and that is tertiary, that's a tertiary experience. So it is interesting then when we're thinking about, okay, now in this current process, we're looking at quality, for instance, and how we make that tertiary, and how the sectors move towards a more tertiary approach. It's actually about aligning the sector more with the students and aligning the sector more with what students are already doing and what our lives already are. So I think when it comes to sort of my hopes for that is that we get that right, and that actually the moves that we make in the sector do align with again, those 500,000 different types of students, whatever their journey might be, that we have sectors that and a tertiary sector that works for them. And I think that's the core point there, is that it has to work for students, and it has to work for every single one of those students. And I think it can be challenging at the moment for those students whose student journey, whose student experience does involve both FE and HE potentially across different institutions, because things work differently across those different institutions. There are things that don't match up. There are things where it can be really tricky in terms of some of that progression, for instance, from FE to HE. So how do we make sure that aligns? How do we make sure that that works for that student? How do we simplify it? How do we make it so that, just the process actually sometimes of applying for college or university, actually just even that process of understanding every different element of it can be really overwhelming. It's a lot of information to take in. You have to really get to grips with how that college or how that university works. And of course, also, every college and every university is also different. They also have their own different elements to it. So I think then, making sure that they all can match together and they all join up nicely, I do think it's a challenge, but I think it's a challenge we can absolutely overcome, and make sure that, as I say, no matter what that student's journey is, that it is interconnected, that it is simple, that it's easy for them to go from one to the other, and that it's also easy for them to step back and go back into something again later in life, or even for them to enter it for the first time later in life. And as I said, so my opening remarks around things when we're looking at the just transition and other different elements that society is going to have to really adapt to, making sure that students, no matter where they are in life, are able to jump in. And that whether that's FE or HE, that's a brilliant experience for them, that equips them with the skills that they need and whatever it is that they want to get out of their educational experience. And then they're able to leave that and do whatever it is that they may want to do with it, and be able to go for it. Yeah.
Thank you. And from an institution point of view, what's your hopes? Susan?
I was just going to say, in terms of people transitioning between FE and HE, coming back, etc., another thing that colleagues in OU south of the border look enviously on is SCQF, which makes things, at least theoretically, a lot simpler. I guess the other potential, the biggest disruptor within the context of this conference to teaching, learning and assessment is generative AI, coming at us faster than I think any of us expected, and we need to capitalise on the opportunities as well as mitigating the risks that provides. I think that I would again say that our international reputation as a world-leading sector, that needs to continue. I think my hope for staff is that the new system removes rather than adds to the burdens, James.
Absolutely.
And my hope for students is that the tertiary system ensures a system that meets their needs and delivers successful outcomes. And I think, as Ellie touched upon, the student body will change. My own view is that COVID in some ways accelerated trends in HE which were coming anyway, relating to blended learning, relating to micro-credentials, the upskilling, reskilling agenda. I mean, the growth in our student body in OU in Scotland specifically, because the Scottish Government have funded it in Scotland, whereas Westminster have not, in micro-credential students is quite phenomenal. And they have their own specific needs, which we need to take account of too. So I see students as a group, although 500,000 individuals, becoming ever more diverse. And my hope is that we can utilize AI in order to better meet their individual needs and aspirations and provide an even more personalized service, personalized education for our students. So I think that's what I'm hoping for.
Sure, Kyrsten, you hope for a lot less burden as well, but I mean, I'm sure that's on your list, let me believe.
Yeah, it's been interesting since 2012, meeting the needs of all sectors at all levels. But no, I mean, for me, in terms of the future, we've got an amazing heritage, and we shouldn't lose that amazing heritage. And we've got amazing strengths, and we shouldn't lose those amazing strengths. But actually, I think what an amazing opportunity we have to be part of something truly transformational. And for me, you know, I think we've got an opportunity here for the whole sector, the whole tertiary sector, to get behind a system that, as Ellie said, it will be providing a system that meets the requirements of the student journey. You know, I don't see how you can argue against that. So I think you know, we know change is coming. We've lived through change. You know, in particular, as Susan said, over the last 4 years, sort of a period of accelerated change in the sector that we know and love. And so I think, you know, we should be up for this, some more changes to get a common approach to the, you know, it just seems like it's just so fantastic that we can be part of it.
Excellent. I'm glad to see the enthusiasm there. Do you see that? Very good. James, system level, what's your hopes for the system?
So let me say now, I mean, reducing the burden is absolutely something that we want to do, but actually, I think Kyrsten's pointed out the much more ambitious opportunity that we also have through working together to set out an ambitious tertiary approach to quality enhancement. A couple of things from our perspective at the Funding Council. First of all, unashamedly, like you, we want to protect and further enhance the quality of the student experience in Scotland. We think that's good for students, we think it's good for Scotland's businesses, Scotland's regions, Scotland's economies, but we also think it's good for our institutions. So let's just get that absolutely clear up in front. That is the business we are in, and that is the journey we are on. The other thing that we're really interested in is we want to unlock collaboration. So we think one of the big lessons from the quality enhancement framework is that if you have a common approach, you can have common endeavour, and you can get collaboration happening at different levels in planned and unplanned ways to generate benefits for individuals, for institutions, and for the system. And we want to see that happening much more porously across the tertiary system, not just in institutions like SRUC, but across all of our 45 institutions. We also, frankly, when money is tight, want the system to be able to give a clear message to our national infrastructure. So we've got people in the room like Jason from JISC, we've got QA, we've got the College Development Network, all of whom have money invested in them to help the system to meet the challenges of delivering excellent education to those 500,000 different types of learners. And we believe a tertiary quality approach will help us to get from the system what it is that you need to enhance the quality of provision in your respective institutions and to give a clear message to the agencies. And then finally, and I'm not just saying this because John is in the room, but we have our Commissioner for Fair Access with us on the QT, and one of the things I was going to say is it will help us, I hope, to tackle some of the big, grand societal challenges. Ellie's mentioned net zero, fair access is absolutely up there. I think a tertiary approach with more people bringing their skills, their knowledge, their talent and their time is the way to go, and that's why we backed it in a really significant way.
Thank you, James. Now, I can tell how much hot air you think is coming from the panel by how many people are going like that in the rows. But now is your chance, you see, right? So we're going to open things up to allow you to have questions and people online. So we've got a roving, well, we've got more than one roving mic, but only one person gets to speak at a time. If you could wait until it arrives, so stick your hand up if you've got a question for us. Wait until it arrives, and then if you please could say who you are and where you're from. Not because we'll come after you afterwards and try to grab you or anything like that, just because it's nice to know what the context is. So if you could do that. And if you're online, please put your question in the chat function, because then we'll be able to pick it up and it will be announced out for you. So we've got a first question down the front. Thank you.
Malone, and I'm from Edinburgh Napier University. This morning we had a plenary lecture from Professor David Emba, and I saw data presented in that presentation that I haven't seen before for my own institution and across the institutions in Scotland. I found it incredibly emotional, but putting the emotions to one side, it'll continue to motivate me in my practice. One of my hopes, I have many hopes for the sector, but one of my hopes for the future is that we have no attainment gap for our Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups of students that belong to those groups. There's mention of the anti-racist curriculum and embedding that in our institutions and in our programs. How are we going to do that? I'd like to hear your comments on that. but also what's a realistic time frame or a goal for or target for us to work towards where we can reduce that attainment gap?
Well, I mean, for the panel members, there was a really striking set of data provided this morning about the attainment gap, and it's actually broken down into individual institutions as well in Scotland. And I think a lot of people who saw that would have been, really taken aback by what it said. And so I think, the core part of your question is, yeah, there are initiatives like anti-racist curriculum started with Advanced HE, and we helped to take that forward with them. How are we going to make these things make any difference? Because one of the things that Professor David Mba said this morning was there have been a lot of initiatives over a number of years, and actually the figures have not moved. And so what can we do to make a real difference? And how does this new approach to tertiary quality help us to do that?
I think that talks to the point I made about grand challenges. So I think we should expect that enhancement can mean different things at different levels in the system. So it can be, for example, changing an assessment to a different type of assessment, and that can be really good enhancement. But at a system level, we also need to think about what are the big changes that we want to see for students and for people in the system. And I was really interested in the theory of change slides we saw earlier, and the way that you could begin to think about that in terms of grand challenges. In terms of my take on it, data should motivate us, but never as much as inequality, right? And so it's great that you've come to the event and been motivated. The question is, so what thereafter? And one of the things that we've done at the Funding Council is we've signed a joint agreement with the Equality and Human Rights Commission. We're the first UK funding authority to do that. We've set out a set of national equality outcomes, and we're working with institutions to understand how those national equality outcomes mirror or differ from the realities in their own context. But we should be positively restless. It's not good enough, and we can do better.
Can I make a wee plug for a wee course that was developed by Open University academics in Santander? It's called Union Black, and it's about the experience of being black and British. In my view, it's a tiny wee bit too much Anglo-centric, but it is a fantastic course, and it is free to anyone working in higher education in the UK or any student in the UK. Union Black, I thought it was wonderful, and we have mandated it for every member of staff in the OU. And I think these kind of, it needs to be a mix of carrot and sticks, but my own view is that actually we need to move a little bit more quickly to the stick with the recalcitrant individuals in our institutions that just don't want to go on with the agenda and give all kinds of excuses for why these inequalities persist.
As long as you're not on commission, then we'll allow you that plug.
Oh, no, we don't get any money for it. It's yet another good free thing that OU does, yeah.
Ellie?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here. First of all, I think it's about acknowledging, so first of all, what does it mean to be anti-racist? What does it mean to have an anti-racist curriculum? What does it mean for our institutions to be anti-racist? And I think one of the first steps of that is acknowledging that anti-racism is about undoing the racism that's already there, and then we have to acknowledge that there is racism in our institutions, and that our institutions may, what is institutionally racist in terms of the building blocks and the structures that are resulting in this attainment gap. The data is there, that's clear. So what do we need to do to unpick that? I think one of the elements here to look at is certainly around poverty and around the poverty-related attainment gap as well, because there's clear links there. Research that we conducted at NUS Scotland earlier this year found that international students were by far disproportionately likely to be homeless, for instance, disproportionately likely to be facing extreme poverty once they're here in Scotland. And some of the reasons for that are really, really obvious. A lot of it is because they're not able to access the same things like hardship funds as other students are able to. Some of it is because of there's the no recourse to public funds, but then there's also limits in terms of how much they're able to work alongside their studies. For instance, there's a huge amount of racist, xenophobic policy that comes from the Home Office but also in many cases from institutions as well. That means that international students, who of course are disproportionately likely to be black and from other ethnic minorities, will be facing. So I think that's one of the first elements of that there. And then there's another thing in terms of going back to what we were talking about, student partnership. And I think student partnership, again, is so key in these EDI matters and in the work that we do to make our institutions anti-racist. And I think that it's really important to acknowledge that as part of that student partnership, that so much burden often gets placed on students who are from ethnic minority backgrounds to do the work themselves, and that's not tackling the issue. What we need to do is we need to be amplifying their voices. We need to be making sure that they are leading this conversation, but also that we're not placing this huge burden of work on a group of students who are already disproportionately affected, in terms of things like the attainment gap. So I think there's a huge number of elements there, and I think it's just hugely important that we're listening to the voices of students from those backgrounds and amplifying their voices, but also making sure we're being really conscious of the burden of work and where that lies as well.
Just a final point before we move on. I just think taking a collaborative approach to quality, a collaborative approach to enhancement means you're not on your own. And I think that's really important. We all should recognize that as an issue. We should all be working together to do something about it. And that means supported by your colleagues in other institutions, but also supported directly by students who have got their particular insights to bring and their particular ideas to bring. So I would, in a sense, that's a plug for how we can go ahead together to actually tackle what is presented to us as something shocking and hopefully also, though, inspiring. We'll move on to the next question, please. Thank you. Just over there.
Thank you. My name's Izzy from RGU, and my question relates to the theme of getting it right for every student. During the pandemic, tertiary education pivoted very well online. Does the panel feel that we have harnessed the learning from that enough to ensure there's enough flexibility and responsiveness in the system to ensure that we are getting it right for every student?
Well, that's a good one. Have we all gone back to our old habits, folks? What do you think?
Okay, I would disagree with the premise. I think the experience of pivoting online in the initial phase from March 20 was pretty mixed. I think by September of that year, a lot of people had used the summer to look at how they were going to present their courses. We were funded, you were funded, we have a module called Taking Your Teaching Online, and we were funded to give that to colleges, schools, and universities. I have to say, colleges and schools took us up on it. A few other universities thought they had much to learn from the Open University. I think eventually the sector got there, but I think it was a very mixed experience. And even within institutions, it varied enormously between disciplines. And I'm not criticising anyone, it was unprecedented and unanticipated. But yeah, that's not answering your point. I just wanted to push back gently on the premise.
Excuse me, you're on this panel. You've got to answer the point. But anyway, Ellie, you want to go next, and then Kyrsten.
So I think it's really important, again, coming on to that point around sort of what happened during the pandemic, it's really important to acknowledge that some of the pivots that happened there worked extremely well for some students. I mean, really well. They absolutely loved it, and it was radically different and life-changing for many of them. For other students, it was also life-changing in the complete opposite direction, and it just did not work at all. And it comes back to this point around every student being different, because everyone will have different needs. And I think that really highlighted that point, because even within, not just within institutions, but within like classes, you would have some students who found the fact they're able to take part online and to do it from their home. That was so much more accessible for them, and it completely opened up a whole new world of possibilities for them. for a huge number of other students, it closed so many doors for them because it just didn't work for them. It wasn't accessible for them. It made it more inaccessible. I was certainly one of those students. You know, I have ADHD, and I struggle enough often in the classroom itself doing things online, and that extra layer, that created a huge barrier for me that really did, I found it really, really difficult to engage and to learn. And then, of course, you know, with those other elements of the student experience as well, which were you know, disappearing in some cases. And I think one of the real challenges coming, and I don't have the answers, to be honest, to this, other than acknowledging that it's really, really difficult, is that now we have those options. There's going to be some decisions that we make that are not going to work for every single student, and that's a real challenge, because a lot of people, I think, often during the pandemic itself, because we moved to online, and there were some people who still really liked in person, a lot of us sort of then moved towards hybrid being the way forward. But of course, hybrid, actually, it's not a mix between online and in person. It's a whole nother thing entirely, with its own challenges and its own opportunities. So that's a third thing. It's not a compromise between the two. So then, again, it means that you've got some people who will work really well with that, others who don't. I think one of the opportunities here, and I think this is one of the opportunities of that sort of working together and that more joined up approach, is an acknowledgement that actually it's okay for us to do things differently to each other. And actually, I think that's one of the huge opportunities between us coming together and working together on this, is actually the fact that we do have you know, a lot of institutions in Scotland who can do things slightly differently. They can do things differently within their institution as well, based on what works best for their student demographic. We know that there are certain demographics of students who you know, are more likely to work really well with in-person, others more likely to do well online, others hybrid. And I think actually acknowledging that is really helpful. And I think a really good comparison is then also looking at you know, the fact that, for instance, students from you know, more impoverished backgrounds, again, there are different places that, so for again, using my own student experience, I went to UWS. For myself, as someone from a deprived background, from someone from a working class home, going to UWS where everyone else was like me, everyone else was from a similar background to me, was a huge opportunity for me. It was brilliant. It opened so many doors, because the support there, it was like I was the default rather than someone they were having to accommodate to. But equally, there are a lot of students from disadvantaged backgrounds, from working class backgrounds, who actually, they want to go to your Russell Groups, to your Ancients, to your Edinburghs, your Glasgows. And they're acknowledging that that's great also, and that the institutions need to be able to adapt to make sure that it's working for those students as well. So acknowledging that there are different groups of students who might choose one institution over another, actually because of things like how they do things, how they do education. And that's a real opportunity. So I think that is one of the ways to move forward. There is still that huge challenge, because no matter what you do, there's always going to be something, particularly in this sort of, you know, online, hybrid, in-person conversation, there are always going to be people that it's not necessarily going to be the best approach for them that you go down. And I think making sure that we're putting in those accommodations, making sure that we are trying to get it right for every single student in that class is essential. But I do think that joined-up approach does present an opportunity for us to do things differently to each other.
Thanks, Ellie, and thanks for sharing your personal experience as well, which I think brings it to life as well. I'm going to move us on, because I know there's at least 2 other questions, maybe 3, 4, who knows. But first over here. Oh.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we
okay.
can, yeah.
Amajit Bassi from the Black Leadership Group, and a colleague of Professor David Mbars, who addressed the conference this morning. I can't help but not respond to the colleague earlier on. And to take Ian Jury's phrase, there's potentially reasons to be cheerful, okay? And I say that because whilst the data was and is stark, it feels as though Scotland is in a better position to acknowledge, to prepare, and also navigate some of the opportunities as well as the challenges that clearly face some of the underrepresented groups that clearly are key to the potential of Scotland, realising its potential. So the pipeline in the school system of black and minority ethnic students is 14%, way above the current census data. So there's a privilege and an opportunity to prepare for what's going to and is baked in to the tertiary system. And I would really encourage people who are at system level, institutional and practitioner level to mobilize together to really be bold in the context of preparing for optimistic futures for those students who are going to be much more diverse than ever before going forward. Just one maybe call for action. I don't think it's just attainment gaps that you ought to look at. It's, as Ellie said, it's the total journey, including post-tertiary, because one of the paradoxes that we've discovered is that invariably black students do well in the school and the college system, and then they have issues at undergraduate and then beyond graduate. And the perversity is that even if they have higher qualifications, they're less likely to be employed. And some of the data profoundly identifies that. So there's a duty of care I would beckon that the tertiary system doesn't stop and end at the institutional gate or the virtual institution gate. It's the total journey. And the final thing is, I think Ellie's point is that the lived experience, even in the planning phase of your tertiary education, needs to be cognizant of that. So maybe looking at that as part of the planning process. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think one of the key features that we see of the Scottish approach is that level of openness and willingness to face up to the challenges that we have and to work collaboratively to fix them. And we want to make sure that we retain that as we start to go forward in our tertiary approach to quality, because it's been so important and it's a key feature of how we're ever going to tackle some of these things. If we pretend they don't exist, we certainly will never tackle them. We have someone, I think, oh, sorry, no, we have on that side first. Apologies. Oh no, we have someone online? Yeah. Sorry, just before you ask the question, Ellie told me earlier that you've got an appointment in the Parliament or something, is that right, in Edinburgh, and you're already cutting it a little bit fine, so you're going to have to leave a little bit early. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to need to sprint down to Queen Street Station now, but thank you so much for having me, and thanks for all the questions.
Okay, so from the interweb, we have something, by the looks of it. Steph.
We do indeed, Alastair, thank you. So this is a question from James. How does the new Scottish framework relate to the Welsh Commission for Tertiary Education and Research, or CTER, as he calls it? She calls it indeed. Are the two nations collaborating in thinking through an integrated post-secondary sector?
Interesting one, yeah. And we have some, well, I think, whether we've got it in this audience, we certainly have some Welsh colleagues with us at the conference. Way, hello, welcome, you are extremely welcome. But, I mean, you know, colleagues, James, I mean, you'll know as well as I do that there is quite a lot of collaboration between Wales and Scotland.
I mean, the first thing I would say, on quality, we absolutely rely on an expert body. You might have heard them, they're called the Quality Assurance Agency, to be our partner in relation to the university sector, the HEI sector. So QA has the benefit not just of working across the UK nations, but globally, and Alastair mentioned in his previous role having responsibility for Wales and Scotland. So we are well connected and advised by QA on all matters quality, including in other jurisdictions where there is a tertiary framework in another part of the UK, and indeed on more recent developments in Wales. I'll tell you a secret, which is I'm missing a visit from the Welsh Government to the Funding Council today to be here with you, and we are keeping a really close eye on the development of the Commission for Tertiary Education and Research. They are looking for a solution in Wales to the challenges and opportunities in Wales. There'll be some things where there is commonality and we can learn from that. Equally well, we are looking for always solutions which work for our institutions our students and for our government. And that's why we work really closely with QA to advise and guide us.
And QA specifically does bits of work to bring together Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, because there are a lot of similarities across the three. And there's, I mean, it's clear as nodding. You're going down to the University's Wales Learning and Teaching Network shortly, I think, aren't you, Claire? Virtually, yes. To do an input about what the enhancement approach has meant, what it really means to that network. We've done things like that before. We have colleagues, as we said, up from Wales here and from Northern Ireland. So it is. It's a growing feature that I have seen in my time, that there's a real desire to work across the three devolved nations and to share practice and to learn from each other. So I think that is a real positive and something that is developing. We have another question up the top there.
Yes, just introducing myself. I'm John Brennan. I'm an Emeritus Professor of Higher Education Research at the Open University. I'm also a visiting professor at the University of Bath, all of which tells you that I'm actually officially retired, but in fact busier than ever. And just coming back to the research side of things, and the sort of things I've been hearing both this afternoon and this morning as well. A lot of interesting things, being said, but just two thoughts that I would like to share, and one question, basically. The first one concerns the comments about partnerships and the importance of partnerships. I mean, yes, with FE, but with employers. I mean, a whole range of things. And, coming back to my own research, and I've done, projects on the topic, and basically, the two findings that stick in my mind are, first, that lots of organizations are very keen to collaborate with universities, and the idea of there being partnerships is a very positive one. However, the experience of partnerships with universities is not always ideal, because generally speaking, the university wants to be in charge, and that's what makes it difficult for the other partners in the partnership. And I would just observe generally that I think we are all aware now that, in a sense, knowledge is everywhere. It's not just sitting in universities, and therefore there's plenty that we in universities can learn from people outside. The second thought, though, comes from, I remember a small project I did many years ago for what was then the Higher Education Funding Council for England, when I was asked to, essentially it was a literature review about graduate employment. But the thing that I most remember about it was the title that I was asked to give to my report. And so the title of the report was Things We Know and Don't Know About Graduate Employment. And I've always found that such a useful, idea to take. And sitting, here today, I felt I was hearing too much about the things that we know, and some of the things we've known for a long time as well. But actually, the more important ones may actually be the things that we don't know. And particularly from a researcher perspective, you see, if we don't know them, you can ask me to do a new project and give me some money, you see. So that's the logic there. But I thought I would just share that, and possibly panel members might come up with some important issues or important things that we don't know.
Okay, well, by a researcher, the things we don't know, would you like to sign up for to ask you to do it? What don't we know? Kyrsten?
Well, actually, I was going to try and sort of make a comment about John's first point about partnership. and about the fact that working with universities wasn't always what it was cracking up to be. And I'm going to completely disagree with you, okay? And I say that as SIUC doesn't have taught degree awarding powers, so our degrees are validated by either the University of Glasgow or the University of Edinburgh. And for a lot of my working career, I've kind of been at the sort of, at the point of contact with the two validating universities, and it has been a superb part of my role, and a bit that I've enjoyed, and we have felt supported, and we SIUC are going through an application for taught degree awarding powers, and we got really brilliant letters of support from both the University of Edinburgh and the University of Glasgow. So it was just to say that, you know, my experience has been a very positive one of working with universities, and one that we are very grateful for.
Yes, Susan.
I would never disagree with an emeritus professor of the Open University who has, you know, probably forgotten more about this area than I'll ever know. I think we're getting better at partnership. Partly, I think, because financially we're all looking to diversify sources of income and be less reliant on, you know, dwindling public funds. But I also wanted to say something about the employability and careers point that was made. I think Scottish universities have responded very, very well to the widening participation and access agenda, starting way back with Ruth Silver's report. And I think all of us now, I'm looking at Kyrsten from University of Scotland, I think all of us are meeting our targets, the interim targets, and looking also at the Commissioner, also on course for 2030. But I think also we're all beginning to realise that it doesn't end on graduation day, and that disadvantaged groups don't necessarily have the social and cultural capital that their more privileged peers do. And I know of at least 2 universities, one ancient, one post-92, that have very impressive careers schemes specifically for working class, SIMD 20, SIMD 40. I'm helping with my old university doing that, and I'd like to see potentially that being also replicated for BAME students. So, you know, I think universities are doing quite a bit, not complacent, but we're doing quite a bit.
James?
And I think that is the watchword, right? Not complacent, very clear about the things that we need to focus on in the future. I can't quite remember the language, but I think it was the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. So it's a really... Donald Rumsfeld. It's a really good point. As we go forward in the enhancement journey, how is it that we drive a focus not just on the things that we know and understand, the bits of the patchwork quilt which we can see in detail, but also the bits where we can bring our knowledge, our skill, our experience, and our data to drive an improvement plan. And we take it as good advice. Thank you.
Right, okay, ladies and gentlemen, I noticed that Glasgow Caledonian University, I think, has turned off the air conditioning, which is probably a hint for us to leave. Thank you very much for your questions, your engagement with the session. I hope you got something from it. Can I please ask you to thank our panel on our behalf, please? Thank you. Now, whatever you do, do not miss the drinks reception and canapes that you can have prior to going in for dinner. They're just going to be out there, so please get some air and then come back in and get some canapes and some drink. Okay, see you later.